Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're settling in for one of those topics that is both endlessly human and endlessly embarrassing. Bathrooms, toilets, latrines, chamber pots, holes in the ground, you name it, people have sat on it. Or squatted over it. Or, if you're unlucky, slipped in it. So, grab a blanket, dim the lights, and prepare to drift off as we wander gently through the history of human waste management. Don't worry, I'll keep it calm, no jump scares, no sudden noises, just the slow, steady story of how kings, peasants, monks, and everyone in between dealt with the one thing we all have in common: bathroom breaks. Now, you'd think this would be simple. You eat, you digest, you handle the results. But history, of course, had to make it complicated because humans never leave well enough alone. Instead of just accepting the natural reality, we wrapped it in ceremony, shame, weird superstitions, and even politics. Yes, toilets have always been political. Let's float gently back, far back, to the ancient world. Imagine Mesopotamia, land of early cities, where writing was new and kings thought building ziggurats was a good use of taxpayer money. Archaeologists have dug up houses in the city of Ur from around 2500 BCE that had what they very generously call toilets. Picture a little clay seat with a pipe leading down to a pit. And here's the thing. Those pits weren't emptied often, at all. So the nice little townhouse family above was essentially living over what can only be described as a slow-growing compost heap of doom. But still, credit where credit is due. It was indoor plumbing. Meanwhile, some of their neighbors were still squatting over a bush, so progress. The ancient Egyptians, as you might expect, made things a little fancier. Wealthy households had limestone toilet seats. Very solid, very uncomfortable, but they looked nice. It was the ancient version of, yes, my bathroom fixtures are marble, please admire. Poorer Egyptians, they went in the sand. The desert, both a giant litter box and the world's least forgiving toilet paper. And then, of course, we get to the Romans. Ah, the Romans. Because if there's one civilization that loved making everyday life into a giant public performance, it was them. They built those famous public latrines, long stone benches with keyhole-shaped cutouts, lined up in neat rows. No partitions, no privacy. Just 20 men in togas sitting shoulder to shoulder, making small talk while handling their business. Imagine going to the toilet and having to maintain polite conversation with your senator neighbor about grain imports. The Romans were not subtle. They even had a shared sponge on a stick for cleaning up afterward. You rinse it in a bucket of vinegar water and then pass it to the next guy. Hygienic? Absolutely not. But very Roman. Why have one sponge per person when you can create a system guaranteed to spread pink eye across the empire? Efficiency. From there, we drift into the Middle Ages. Now, people love to say, oh, medieval folks were dirty, they never bathed, they didn't know how to use toilets, which is half true. They definitely did not have the luxury of a clean, tiled bathroom with running water, but they weren't quite as clueless as people imagine. Castles, for example, had something called garderobes. Lovely word, isn't it? Sounds fancy. Almost like a wardrobe. But nope, it was essentially a little stone closet, usually sticking out of the castle wall, with a hole in the floor. You sit down, gravity takes over, and your waste drops into a moat or a pit, or sometimes directly onto the heads of unfortunate peasants walking below. The name garderobe actually means to guard clothes, because people would sometimes hang their cloaks in these little toilet rooms. Why? Because the ammonia fumes from all the waste kept moths away. That's right. Medieval closets doubled as moth-repellent stations. Nothing says fresh-smelling cloak than eau de urine. And chamber pots. Oh yes, the true MVP of medieval plumbing. Rich or poor, everyone had a chamber pot tucked under the bed. When you had to go in the night, you just pull it out, do your thing, and shove it back under. The next morning, someone, usually a servant if you were wealthy, would empty it out the window. Sometimes with the cheerful cry of Gardy Lou, which basically meant, "Look out below! Here comes last night's dinner." Picture walking down a narrow street in Paris in 1400. It's evening, you're minding your business, maybe buying bread, when suddenly a bucket of very unholy water comes flying from a window above. You'd start wearing wide-rimmed hats too. Of course, royalty had their own bathroom quirks. Kings and queens didn't just go to the bathroom. No, that would be far too private. In many courts, there was an official position called the Groom of the Stool. Yes, that was their actual title. This person, usually a nobleman, because apparently no job was too humiliating if it came with royal favor, was responsible for assisting the monarch during their bathroom breaks. And before you ask, yes, that means exactly what you think it does. Imagine working your way up through the noble hierarchy, earning land and titles, and ending up with the prestigious honor of standing by while Henry VIII had a bowel movement. On the bright side, you got incredible access to the king. On the less bright side, you could never look at him during dinner the same way again.
The Tudors, in fact, had portable toilets called close stools, essentially a padded wooden chair with a hole in the middle and a pot underneath. Henry VIII had one that was upholstered in black velvet, because why not make your toilet seat match your throne? Consistency is key in interior design. And let's float gently over to monasteries, because monks, too, had to go. Many monasteries built long rows of latrines, sometimes over running water so the waste was carried away, which sounds efficient until you remember monks lived in near silence. Imagine 50 monks, all using the latrine at the same time in complete quiet. It must have been a very strange soundscape. Now, things only got worse in cities. Medieval towns were crowded, muddy, and smelled like, well, exactly how you think they smelled. Human waste, animal waste, rotting food. Streets had open gutters where chamber pots were emptied. Rain helped wash it away, but on a dry summer day, good luck. London, Paris, Florence, all the great medieval cities had the same problem. Too many people, not enough toilets. And when you don't have toilets, you have public nuisances. City councils regularly passed laws about where and when you could empty your pot, because apparently people were just tossing it anywhere. You'd think common sense would prevent that. But no, humans have never been good at common sense. As we drift further forward into the Renaissance, things got fancier, but not necessarily cleaner. Aristocrats built more elaborate bathrooms, often decorated with nice tiles, but they were still chamber pots at heart. Versailles, that glittering palace of Louis XIV, had stunning halls, sparkling chandeliers, golden everything, and very few toilets. Guests at the palace would just relieve themselves in stairwells or behind curtains. Imagine the smell under all that perfume. Louis XIV himself had a close stool, of course, and he sometimes gave audiences while seated on it. Yes, imagine being a courtier nervously presenting your petition to the king while he, quite literally, did his business. Absolute power indeed. All right, let's pause for a breath. We floated from Mesopotamia's clay toilets to Roman sponges to chamber pots raining down on medieval streets and velvet-padded royal thrones. And that's just the beginning.
In the next stretch, we'll wander into the Enlightenment, the Industrial Age, and the birth of the modern flush toilet, complete with all the eccentric inventors, disastrous sewer systems, and of course the Victorians trying desperately to pretend that bodily functions didn't exist. So, where were we? Ah yes, we've left behind the medieval garderobes and velvet-seated chamber pots, and now we're gliding gently into the world of the Enlightenment and beyond, a time when people thought rational science could solve everything.
Which is true, if by everything you mean astronomy, philosophy, and occasionally plumbing. Because yes, this is where the story of the flush toilet starts, and it's not glamorous. It's kind of silly, very experimental, and at first, wildly impractical. Let's start with a man named Sir John Harington. He was a godson of Queen Elizabeth I, which sounds like a pretty cushy start in life. Unfortunately, he also had a reputation as a bit of a joker, a prankster, and kind of a nuisance at court, which naturally made him perfect for inventing one of the most world-changing devices in history. In 1596, Harington came up with a thing he called the Ajax. Not Ajax, the Greek hero, but a pun on Ajax, which was slang for toilet. It was essentially a prototype of the modern flush. Water would wash away the waste instead of having someone just dump your chamber pot out the window. Revolutionary. The Queen herself even had one installed, which you would think would be the ultimate endorsement. But here's the thing. Harington's invention was kind of clunky, noisy, and didn't really catch on. People thought it wasted too much water. So instead of sparking a bathroom revolution, it became more of a weird court curiosity. The Elizabethans weren't quite ready to give up their chamber pots. So poor Sir John, remembered more for his bathroom humor than his bathroom innovation, had to wait centuries for someone else to revive the idea. Fast forward to the 18th century. Cities are bigger, busier, and far smellier. You've got Enlightenment thinkers writing lofty treatises about human rights and reason, while the streets outside their coffee houses are literally covered in waste. London especially had a problem. Too many people, too many chamber pots, and nowhere for it all to go. People were still emptying pots into gutters. Some wealthier homes had cesspits, basically giant holes under the house where waste collected until it overflowed or someone shoveled it out. Yes! Imagine eating dinner in a townhouse with a giant tank of sewage quietly fermenting under your floorboards. By the late 1700s, cities were practically begging for better toilets, and finally, someone delivered. Here comes Alexander Cummings. In 1775, he patented the S-trap, the curving pipe that still sits under every toilet today. Its genius? The little bend in the pipe held water, which blocked sewer gases from rising back up into the bathroom. Before this, toilets could smell, let's just say, apocalyptic. With Cummings' simple S-shape, suddenly a flush toilet was actually practical. From there, inventors kept tinkering. One added a pull handle. Another improved the bowl. By the early 1800s, toilets were starting to look a lot like the ones we know today. They weren't widespread yet, too expensive, too fancy, but the technology was in place. And then, the Victorians arrived. Oh, the Victorians. That wonderfully uptight bunch obsessed with manners, propriety, and pretending the human body didn't exist. You'd think that would make toilets awkward for them, but in fact, their obsession with cleanliness turned out to be the perfect recipe for a bathroom revolution. Because for Victorians, waste wasn't just smelly and inconvenient, it was a moral failing. A dirty street wasn't just unhygienic, it was sinful. And they were convinced bad smells caused disease thanks to something called the miasm theory. The idea was that sickness floated in the air carried by foul odors, which meant, logically, the best way to prevent cholera was to eliminate smells. So cities started scrambling to build better sewage systems. London in particular had a wake-up call in the summer of 1858, the infamous Great Stink. Temperatures soared, the River Thames essentially became a giant open sewer, and the smell was so bad that Parliament couldn't meet because politicians literally couldn't sit in their chamber without gagging. Imagine important national decisions being delayed not by war or scandal, but because the entire building smelt like 1,000 rotten cesspits. That was enough motivation. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette got the funding to build massive new sewer networks. And once those pipes were in place, suddenly the flush toilet made perfect sense. Waste didn't just sit under your house anymore. It could vanish, carried away through a hidden underground system. Out of sight, out of mind. Naturally, once toilets became practical, they also became, well, decorative. Victorians couldn't resist turning everything into a chance for over-the-top design. So you got porcelain toilets with floral patterns, mahogany toilet seats, even gilded handles. Because nothing says refined taste like a toilet painted with roses. Of course, this was also the age of etiquette books, which meant people wrote entire guides about how to use the bathroom politely. Guests needed to know whether they should ask for a chamber pot or a water closet. Some guides even reminded readers that flushing twice was considered rude because water cost money. Imagine embarrassing yourself at a Victorian dinner party by overflushing. Truly, social ruin. Meanwhile, not everyone caught up at the same pace. Wealthy Victorians had flush toilets and sewer lines. The poor still had outdoor privies, basically wooden outhouses with a hole over a pit. In crowded industrial cities, several families might share one, which, as you can imagine, made for a deeply unpleasant experience. And then there were the night soil men. Yes, that was the actual job title. These were the guys who came at night with buckets, shoveling out cesspits and privies and carting the waste away. Sometimes they sold it as fertilizer, which meant, technically, your cabbage patch might have been grown with the help of your neighbor's toilet contributions. Circle of life, very sustainable.
Let's pause again for a second, because it's worth remembering how much of human history involved living right next to your own waste. For thousands of years, most people had to accept the smells, the flies, the overflowing pits. The flush toilet wasn't just a luxury, it was a literal lifesaver. Better sanitation cut down on disease, improved city living, and probably gave people a little more dignity along the way. And of course, once the Victorians had flush toilets, they couldn't stop bragging about them. By the end of the 19th century, bathroom fixtures were proudly advertised in catalogs. Some even held exhibitions of new toilet designs. Imagine wandering a Victorian trade show where people were politely admiring the latest mahogany-seated model, nodding gravely about the improved efficiency of the flush mechanism. High culture indeed. So, by the turn of the 20th century, the bathroom had changed completely. From chamber pots under the bed to porcelain thrones with running water, the transformation was astonishingly fast. Within just a few decades, something once handled with embarrassment and servants' labor became a private, daily ritual that defined modern life. All right, that's enough for now. We've drifted from Elizabethan pranks to Enlightenment patents, floated over cesspits, and smelled our way through the great stink of London. We've arrived at the moment where the flush toilet isn't just an odd invention, it's a symbol of progress, hygiene, and Victorian pride. In the next part, we'll wander into the 20th century. We'll look at how toilets became standardized, how advertising turned bathrooms into symbols of status, and how the humble toilet traveled across the world, sometimes embraced, sometimes resisted, and always reinvented. So, we've made it through the age of cesspits, chamber pots, and the great stink of London. By the dawn of the 20th century, the flush toilet had arrived. It was no longer just a quirky luxury for kings or an odd contraption in a nobleman's house. It was starting to become normal.
And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because once humanity finally figured out how to flush waste away, we immediately turned the bathroom into a place of fashion, status, and, in some cases, advertising glory. Let's start in the early 1900s. By this point, most wealthy urban homes in Europe and America had some kind of indoor toilet. Often they were tucked into what was called the water closet, a tiny room, usually just big enough for the toilet itself. It was still considered vaguely improper to put a toilet in the same space as your bath. The Victorians had drawn a sharp line between cleaning the outside and cleaning the inside. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Early toilets could still smell, let's say, questionable. But technology was improving fast. Flush mechanisms got quieter. Tanks were designed to sit high on the wall with a long pull chain, the classic look you see in old movies. And porcelain became the standard material, not just because it was strong, but because it looked clean. White porcelain was the ultimate Victorian flex. Look at my shiny, spotless bathroom. No germs here. And then came the golden age of toilet marketing. Companies like Thomas Crapper & Co., yes, that was really his name, and no, he didn't invent the toilet, though he did popularize it, started advertising toilets as modern, scientific, and respectable. Suddenly, bathroom fixtures were appearing in catalogs right alongside fashionable hats and new furniture. Imagine leafing through a 1910 catalog and seeing ads boasting about the hygienic efficiency of a flush toilet, complete with polite illustrations of porcelain bowls and polished handles. Very dignified, very proper. Now, the 20th century also brought a shift in how people thought about privacy. For most of history, bathroom use had been, well, communal. Romans sat in rows. Medieval peasants shared outhouses. Even monarchs had attendants hovering awkwardly nearby. But by the early 1900s, privacy was becoming part of the experience. Closing a door, locking it, sitting alone. For the first time in human history, using the bathroom was considered a solitary ritual. And that privacy became deeply cultural. In America, bathrooms started expanding. Instead of just a water closet, you had a full bathroom suite. Toilet, sink, bathtub, mirror. The toilet wasn't hidden away anymore. It became part of daily routines, morning and night. In Europe, things evolved differently. Bathrooms stayed smaller, more utilitarian, and sometimes toilets were still separate from the bath. Which explains why, if you've ever traveled in France, you might find the toilet in one room and the sink in another. Confusing, yes, but historically logical.
Meanwhile, sanitation campaigns took off. Governments realized that cleaner cities meant fewer diseases. Posters went up, urging people to wash hands, flush properly, and maintain hygiene. Schools started installing toilets for children. Factories built restrooms for workers. The humble toilet had gone from taboo subject to public health hero. And yet, even as flush toilets spread through the industrialized world, huge parts of the globe still relied on older methods. Rural areas in Asia, Africa, and Latin America often stuck with pit latrines or open fields well into the mid-20th century. Installing sewers and plumbing wasn't cheap, after all. This created a weird global split. In one part of the world, people were buying pastel-colored bathroom suites with matching toilet covers. In another, families were still digging holes in the ground. Two very different realities, all coexisting in the same century. Of course, the 20th century also gave us some very specific bathroom quirks. For instance, the rise of the bidet. Now, bidets had existed in France since the 18th century, little low sinks for washing yourself after using the toilet. But they didn't go mainstream until the 20th century, when Europeans embraced them as a symbol of hygiene and sophistication. In Italy, Spain, and France, nearly every modern bathroom came with a bidet. Meanwhile, in Britain and America, the bidet remained exotic, even scandalous. During World War II, American soldiers encountered them in European brothels, which permanently associated bidets with improper activities in their minds. That cultural hangover lasted decades, which is why, to this day, Americans remain strangely squeamish about them, while Europeans treat them as normal. And then there was the bathroom as a design statement. By the 1950s, in the post-war boom, bathrooms became pastel wonderlands. Mint green bathtubs, pink sinks, powder blue toilets. If you've ever seen your grandparents' bathroom and wondered why it looks like a candy store exploded, that's why. The bathroom had gone from a hidden necessity to a place you could proudly decorate. Magazines even ran photo spreads of the modern bathroom, complete with curtains, wallpaper, and yes, fluffy toilet seat covers. Advertising leaned into it. Toilet paper wasn't just toilet paper, it was soft, strong, and scented. Ads promised that using the right brand would make you a better homemaker, which, let's be honest, is a strange standard to measure personal worth by. But welcome to the mid-century consumer dream. Every part of life was marketable, even the bathroom. Let's pause here and glide sideways into a more global perspective. Because while pastel toilets were booming in American suburbs, Japan was quietly beginning a bathroom revolution of its own. Starting in the 1960s, Japanese companies like Toto began developing high-tech toilets. Heated seats, built-in bidet functions, automatic lids, musical flushing sounds to cover up noises. By the 1980s, the Japanese washlet had become famous worldwide. This was a whole new philosophy. The toilet not just as a utility, but as a technological wonder. Sitting on one was like piloting a spaceship, buttons everywhere, promising comfort, hygiene, and a touch of luxury. Compare that to a British outhouse in the countryside, and you can see just how uneven bathroom history was around the globe. Meanwhile, back in America, the late 20th century saw the rise of something much less glamorous: the public restroom problem. Cities had grown massive, but providing enough clean, safe public toilets? Not a priority. Instead, you got grim gas station bathrooms, graffiti-covered stalls, and endless jokes about how terrible public toilets were. And yet, even here, culture was shifting. Laws began requiring accessible toilets for people with disabilities. Gender-neutral bathrooms emerged in some places. Even the simple question of how many stalls versus urinals a public restroom should have became a heated debate among architects. The bathroom was, quietly, awkwardly, political. By the end of the 20th century, toilets were everywhere in the developed world. Most urban homes had at least one, many had 2 or 3. Plumbing was standardized, toilet paper was mass-produced in dozens of varieties, from bargain rolls to luxury quilted brands. The bathroom was no longer taboo. It was just part of daily life. But the history of toilets never quite loses its edge of absurdity, because humans, no matter how sophisticated we get, still have to deal with the same basic reality. And whether you're a Roman senator sharing a sponge, a Tudor king on a velvet stool, or a suburban dad in a mint green bathroom, the story remains weirdly, wonderfully the same. All right, let's take another breath. We've drifted through the rise of porcelain, wandered into pastel bathrooms, peeked into Japan's space-age washlets, and even smelled the decline of public restrooms. And we're still not done. In the next part, we'll explore the late 20th and early 21st centuries, eco-toilets, composting toilets, space toilets, and the ongoing battle over how humanity manages the most universal of human needs. So here we are. Humanity has spent thousands of years squatting over pits, dangling over moats, and arguing about whether floral porcelain is tasteful or tacky. By the end of the 20th century, toilets were everywhere in the developed world. Most urban homes had at least one, many had 2 or 3. Plumbing was standardized, toilet paper was mass-produced in dozens of varieties, from bargain rolls to luxury quilted brands. The bathroom was no longer taboo. It was just part of daily life. Because why settle for a basic flush when you could have buttons, eco-flushes, self-cleaning bowls, or a toilet that sings to you? Let's start with the eco angle. By the 1970s and 80s, people started worrying about the environment. Energy crises, pollution, growing awareness of climate change. And toilets? Well, they use a lot of water. A single flush could send up to 7 gallons swirling away. Multiply that by millions of households, and you've got an invisible but massive drain on resources. So, governments got involved. In the US, laws in the 1990s mandated low-flow toilets, cutting water use to about 1.6 gallons per flush, which was good in theory, but in practice, early models didn't work very well. People complained about double flushing, the ultimate defeat of an eco-toilet. Comedians made jokes, manufacturers went back to the drawing board. Eventually, technology caught up. Modern low-flow toilets actually work. Dual-flush systems, one button for liquid waste, another for solid, became popular in Europe, Australia, and slowly in the US. It was the return of toilet politics. Some saw them as progress, others as government overreach. Only in modern society could flushing become a culture war. At the same time, composting toilets gained traction, especially among eco-enthusiasts, campers, and off-grid households. The idea is simple.
instead of flushing waste away with gallons of drinking water, you let it decompose into usable fertilizer. In theory, elegant. In practice, often smelly. Some designs work beautifully. Sealed chambers, clever ventilation, microbial breakdown. Others, not so much. Let's just say many a hopeful eco-couple has discovered that romantic off-grid cabin life comes with the reality of stirring compost in the middle of January. Still, composting toilets remain a fascinating reminder that modern solutions often circle back to very ancient ideas. After all, using waste as fertilizer was common for millennia. We just put a shiny eco label on it. But not everyone wanted rustic eco toilets. Some wanted luxury. And no one does luxury toilets quite like Japan. We touched on this in part 3, but it's worth slowing down to admire it fully. The Japanese washlet became legendary in the late 20th century. Heated seats, a gift from heaven on cold mornings, built-in bidet sprays with adjustable pressure, air dryers, deodorizing fans, automatic lids that open when you walk into the room as if bowing politely to greet you. Some even play music to cover up sounds, because silence can be awkward.
It's the ultimate cultural contrast. In the West, we treated toilets as shameful, hidden things. In Japan, they became a canvas for engineering brilliance, a space where technology, comfort, and cleanliness met. Sitting down became not just a necessity, but an experience. By the 21st century, Japanese toilets were so famous that tourists made a point of trying them. Entire travel blogs were written about them. Compare that to, say, an American highway rest stop, and you see how unevenly bathroom history still unfolds. Now, speaking of awkward rest stops, the 20th century also brought us the great public restroom debates. Cities struggled and still struggle with providing clean, safe, accessible public toilets. In many places, they were scarce, hidden, or downright terrifying. Anyone who has ever opened the door to a questionable gas station bathroom knows the silent dread of deciding whether you really have to go. Accessibility slowly improved thanks to disability rights movements. Laws required wider stalls, grab bars, and ramps. Gender-neutral bathrooms appeared in some progressive spaces, sparking debates that continue today. Once again, toilets proved they're never just about plumbing. They're about culture, politics, and inclusion. And then, of course, there's the final frontier. Literally, space toilets. Because astronauts, too, must go. And zero gravity makes that much trickier than you'd like to imagine. Early space missions basically involved bags. Yes, astronauts taped bags to themselves with varying degrees of success. It was not elegant. Apollo astronauts described the experience in unglamorous detail. One called it the most miserable part of spaceflight. Eventually, NASA developed space toilets that use suction instead of gravity. Fans create airflow that pulls waste into a container. Liquids are filtered and, yes, recycled into drinking water. Solids are compressed and stored until disposal, which means in space, every flush is an engineering marvel. There are even training sessions. Astronauts practice sitting on a space toilet using cameras and alignment guides, because in zero gravity, you need precision. Imagine explaining that to a room full of serious engineers. My job is to help astronauts practice not missing the space toilet. The International Space Station now has fairly advanced toilets. Still not glamorous, but functional. And as humanity dreams of Mars missions, designing better space bathrooms remains a top priority. Because if you're going to spend months in a spaceship, you want a reliable toilet. Otherwise, morale drops quickly.
Back on Earth, the 21st century brought yet another layer of toilet culture: design and luxury branding. High-end homes started installing spa bathrooms, heated floors, waterfall showers, and yes, high-tech toilets with touchscreens. Some models cost thousands of dollars, because apparently nothing says success quite like a toilet that remembers your preferred seat temperature. Meanwhile, at the other end of the spectrum, billions of people worldwide still lack access to any safe toilet at all. Organizations like the World Health Organization and UNICEF highlight this constantly. Poor sanitation is one of the biggest global health issues. Diseases spread quickly when people have no choice but to relieve themselves in open fields or unsafe latrines. So the toilet story, even today, is a story of extremes. In some places, people debate over scented toilet paper. In others, entire communities face disease outbreaks because there's nowhere safe to go. The toilet gap, as it's sometimes called, is one of the starkest divides in modern life. And then, in true human fashion, we've even turned toilets into entertainment. In Taiwan, there are restaurants where you sit on toilet-shaped chairs and eat curry out of miniature toilet bowls. Yes, really. Because nothing enhances your dining experience quite like eating brown food out of a porcelain replica. It's kitschy, gross, and oddly popular. There are also museums dedicated entirely to toilets. India has the Sulabh International Museum of Toilets, which displays everything from golden chamber pots to medieval privies. Japan has the Toto Museum, celebrating the history of their washlets. Humans, it seems, can turn absolutely anything into a cultural experience, even the bathroom. So, to take a slow breath and look around. We started with Mesopotamian pits, drifted through Roman benches, Tudor velvet seats, Victorian sewer crises, pastel 1950s bathrooms, Japanese washlets, and space toilets. Along the way, toilets shaped cities, saved lives, and revealed just how absurdly inventive and absurdly human we really are. And yet, the story isn't finished. As climate change intensifies, as urban populations grow, as we dream of Mars colonies, the question of where do we go remains both practical and profound. The toilet, humble as it is, continues to evolve. Let's pause here. Take a moment to appreciate your own bathroom. Simple, reliable, maybe not covered in roses or equipped with heated jets, but nonetheless the product of thousands of years of human trial, error, and a great deal of bad smells. In the final stretch, part 5, we'll drift back a little. We'll revisit the weirdest, grossest, and funniest bathroom moments in history. A gentle highlight reel of royal mishaps, cultural quirks, and the strange ways toilets shaped the world. So let's be honest. For all the engineering marvels, the life-saving sanitation, and the billions of dollars in plumbing infrastructure, toilets are still, at the end of the day, deeply funny. And history, bless it, is absolutely full of bathroom mishaps, awkward moments, and legends that remind us just how universal this part of life really is. Grab a candle, dim the lights, and let's drift through history's weirdest toilet tales. Royal bathroom drama. Let's begin with kings and queens, because if anyone was going to turn something as ordinary as using the bathroom into an event, it was royalty. Take Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. This man had the most extravagant court in Europe. Golden halls, glittering gardens, armies of wig-wearing nobles. But what about the bathroom? Well, Versailles was notoriously bad with plumbing. Thousands of courtiers wandered around the palace with nowhere decent to go. Many relieved themselves in stairwells, fireplaces, or behind curtains. The palace literally stank. Louis himself, though, had a special throne, a toilet disguised as an elegant armchair. And get this, he often received guests while using it. Yes, important political discussions conducted mid-relief. One visiting nobleman fainted upon realizing the king was multitasking in ways he had not prepared for. Then there's Queen Elizabeth I. Her father, Henry VIII, had installed early close stools, basically potted boxes with chamber pots, for royal use. Elizabeth inherited the setup, complete with servants called Groom of the Stool, whose official duty was to help with, well, the most personal of royal moments. Imagine putting that on your resume. What did you do for a living? I managed the Queen's bowel movements. And it wasn't a minor job. Grooms of the Stool were powerful. They had intimate access to the monarch, literally and politically. In Tudor England, helping the king poop could launch your career. Exploding toilets. Now, not all bathroom stories are glamorous. Some are downright dangerous. In Victorian London, where sewers were still a bit experimental, methane gas sometimes built up in pipes. Which means yes, exploding toilets were a real hazard. There are recorded cases of unsuspecting gentlemen lighting a candle in the bathroom only for the entire contraption to erupt beneath them. Imagine explaining that injury to the doctor.
Even into the 20th century, poorly ventilated systems occasionally caused toilet backdrafts, which just proves plumbing is serious business. Famous deaths on the toilet. Of course, no bathroom history would be complete without mentioning those unfortunate few who met their end mid-sit. The most famous is probably Elvis Presley. The king of rock and roll died in 1977 in his Graceland bathroom. His death became a cultural legend, spawning countless bad jokes, tacky souvenirs, and conspiracy theories that he faked it. To this day, Elvis on the toilet remains an uncomfortable shorthand for fame's cruel irony. But he wasn't the first. The English King George II also died on the loo in 1760, collapsing while, as the polite historians phrase it, engaged in his necessary functions. The Roman Emperor Elvis's ancient counterpart, Vespasian, didn't die on the toilet, but he did impose a urine tax in Rome, turning public latrines into a source of imperial revenue, which feels equally undignified, if less fatal. And then there's Catherine the Great of Russia. For centuries, rumors falsely claimed she died on the toilet. She actually died in bed after a stroke. The myth was so widespread that even dignified history books repeated it. Which goes to show, once a bathroom story catches on, it sticks forever. Public toilet graffiti, ancient edition. Now, let's step into the public toilets of Pompeii. Yes, ancient Romans had shared latrines, and people being people, they left graffiti. Archaeologists have uncovered bathroom scribbles ranging from political slogans to crude jokes. One translated example: "I am amazed, O wall, that you have not collapsed, bearing the tedious scribblings of so many writers." So yes, humanity has been complaining about bathroom graffiti for 2,000 years. The medieval castle problem. Life in a castle may sound romantic, but let's remember the bathrooms. Medieval castles had garderobes, little stone closets built into the walls, with the hole dropping waste into the moat or a pit below. Sounds fine, until you realize attackers sometimes climbed into the castle through the toilet shafts. Nothing like sneaking past enemy guards only to emerge directly into the Lord's privy chamber. There's even a story of one Scottish castle where defenders blocked the garderobe tunnels with spiky brambles, turning the toilet into a lethal trap for intruders. Imagine that battle report. We lost half the men in the enemy's bathroom pipes. Cultural quirks and odd inventions. Across history, people have invented some truly bizarre bathroom tools. The Victorians had toilet hats, little lace covers placed over chamber pots to hide their shameful contents, because nothing says class like accessorizing your waist. In ancient China, aristocrats used carved jade toilet rests, smooth, cool, and absurdly expensive. The 18th century brought the portathrone, a mobile toilet hidden inside elegant furniture so you could relieve yourself mid-card game without leaving the parlor. Imagine your opponent pausing dramatically, only for you to realize he's not bluffing, he's flushing. And let's not forget the legendary toilet paper alternatives. Corn cobs in rural America, snow in Siberia, moss in northern Europe, coconut husks in the tropics. The Romans had communal sponges on sticks, which were shared. Without soap, civilization is miraculous, honestly. Toilet humor goes global. The thing is, bathroom humor is eternal. From Chaucer's fart jokes to Shakespeare's cheeky puns, from Monty Python sketches to modern sitcoms. We laugh about this stuff because it's universal. It cuts through class, culture, and time. One medieval manuscript even includes a cartoon of a knight literally fighting a giant poop monster. Yes, scholars call it marginalia. I call it proof that people in the Middle Ages had the exact same sense of humor as 10-year-olds today.
Toilets as symbols. Before we close, let's appreciate one last thing. Toilets are more than plumbing. They've been symbols. For some, they represent modernity, the triumph of science over disease. For others, they're symbols of inequality, the toilet gap, where billions lack access.
For Japan, they became symbols of national pride and technology. For astronauts, they represent the most basic human need that even space travel can't escape. So yes, toilets are funny, but they're also deeply important. They shape cities, health, culture, and dignity. And that's why, strange as it may sound, the story of the toilet is really the story of us. Final flush. So, here we are. We've traveled thousands of years across continents, through castles, palaces, sewers, rocket ships, and yes, questionable restaurants serving curry in mini toilets. And after all that, one truth stands clear. No matter how powerful, how poor, how ancient, or how modern, everyone, everywhere, has always had to ask the same simple question: where do I go? And in that question lies the entire messy, funny, smelly, and ingenious history of human civilization. So the next time you close the bathroom door behind you, take a deep breath, sit down, and remember, you're part of a tradition as old as humanity itself. Flush with pride.